I'm sorry, Judge. I thought this was like all the other tools I'd ever used. I had no idea this could happen. So when we're thinking about those kinds of things, I don't think an AI chatbot is going to be the kind of thing that's going to take that kind of work away. It's not well suited to that. But it will be very good at doing all of the boilerplate that we get paralegals to do. But that doesn't mean we're not going to need paralegals, because paralegals will still be setting those programs up and then inspecting the output to make sure that the output is actually suitable. So this is what I'm saying. What we're actually learning now, even just 1 year in, is that AI is not about mass unemployment. It's going to turn us all into people who spend a lot of time eyeballing and checking the outputs of AI.
And that's a really interesting point. I heard the other day, I was at a talk and we had an expert in AI, and he mentioned one of these reports. I think it might have been the Oxford Dictionary. They have like a word of the year, and their word of the year was hallucination.
Hallucination, yes.
Yeah. Tell us more about that, because I think that touches upon this story you've just told us about. And it's definitely not hallucination of humans, I don't think we're talking about here, are we?
So we talked about this transformer, which is at the heart of what a chatbot is doing. And what happens is you put your question to the chatbot, your prompt to the chatbot, and it goes into the transformer. And the transformer is basically looking at all of the data that it's learned while keeping its eye on the question that you've asked. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to find the most likely, statistically likely response to the question that you put. And it's going to generate that response. But the chatbot has no sense internally whether that's true or false. And you've got to remember that the internet is filled with, well, lies. Let's just put it out there. And craziness and rants and all sorts of misinformation, as well as Wikipedia and the Times and the Guardian and all of these great news sources. But it's a mix. And the chatbot's been trained on all of that. And so the answer that it generates is what it thinks is the likely answer, but may have zero basis in fact. And as near as anyone can tell, that is an artifact of the way these systems work. In other words, that is not a bug. It's just the way these systems work, because they will be good at generating the most likely response, but the most likely response may not be the correct one.
And so how do you verify if you're being told the truth? Because our go-to would then be the internet. And if the internet's wrong, then I'm guessing some human somewhere.
This is particularly a problem if you're asking it a question where you don't have enough expertise to be able to sniff out that does not feel right. But maybe, in your gut, you're like, really, ChatGPT? So as soon as you have that feeling, the best thing to do is to ask the question a different way. Rephrase it. Be less vague. Be extremely direct. Give an example or two, if there's an example or two. That helps ChatGPT generate a more correct answer. And if that more correct answer is exactly the same as the answer it got you last time, okay, maybe it was the right answer. If you're still not convinced, if it's ChatGPT, go and ask Claude, all right? Because again, trained entirely differently. So if you're getting exactly the same answer from both of them, again, higher probability that, you don't necessarily believe it, but they're both saying the same thing, might be right. The big thing here is that until last year, we never had to consider that a computer would make things up. It was impossible. Computers didn't make things up. They would have bugs, but they couldn't make things up. Well, actually, that now has to play into our relationship with a computer, is that actually a computer just makes things up from time to time. And so we need to now think about how we can actually run the ruler over it.
And you touched upon a really important part of ChatGPT and these bots, and that's the way we ask a question and those prompts. There seems to be this almost like a profession developing, which is around prompt engineering. Like, people are selling prompts. They've spent time and effort working these through, crafting these questions, and then they're selling them online. Could you tell us more about what makes a good prompt? Are there specific words we should be using? Is there a specific structure that I should be using?
So, okay, this is a very big field. And the reason it's a big field and also a very messy one is because we're all playing with English. And English is a big, fun, messy language, which is imprecise in all sorts of really wonderful ways, which also makes it terribly difficult to sort of get a handle on, right? That's kind of the beauty of language. And English in particular has a lot of slipperiness around. And so that's what makes prompt engineering much more of an art, and I would probably say a black art, than a science. However, what we know, recent research published, I think, only 3 weeks ago, it turns out that a chatbot will pick up on the emotional tone of a request made to it. And so if you want to improve the reliability of your chatbot, you will end your question, your prompt to the chatbot with, "This is very important to my career." You put that in, statistical improvement across the board with any chatbot, probably because it's read enough information where people are pleading about getting good data or whatever, that it just does what it can internally to sort of lift the operation. But again, we don't really know why it does it. We just know that it is somewhat attuned tuned it to certain kinds of emotional communication. That's one. So don't bury your emotions when you're having a conversation with a chatbot.
Well, so you just pour your heart out and go, hey, I'm feeling like this. I really need your help.
There's a whole other set of issues around privacy that may become involved at that point, depending on what you're pouring your heart out about. But definitely a little bit of pleading seems to help with that. The rest of it is based on lots and lots of human trial and error. And I tried this, it did this. I tried this, it didn't do this. Some of that is going to be based on a context. Now, one of the things that was discovered fairly early on is that one of the ways you can create context for a question that you're putting to a chatbot is by creating a character. So the example that I use in the book is you are a world-class CFO. You're working at a business that's having a down year and you need to cut costs 5% across the board. Can you create a plan that will do this with minimal disruption to the business, right? And you pad that out. So it's almost a little bit of a short story where you create a character and you're saying to the chatbot, you are this character. You're in this scene and you have this problem to solve. And that's a classic format for a short story. And that helps the chatbot to really focus and give a great response. And there's a lot of sites out there. You can Google around for them, which will show you can address it this way, you can address it that way. There are some that say, I am a computer security expert. And I looked at that prompt and I was like, okay, if you put that prompt to ChatGPT, you're probably in trouble. First off, because why would you be putting that prompt to ChatGPT? And you're probably relying on the response from ChatGPT to be accurate and truthful and implementable in your organization. Do you not have a security expert in your organization? And if you don't, how can you tell if the advice you're getting from ChatGPT is good? So you have to be careful about the questions that you're asking and the context for those questions. Not because ChatGPT is going to intentionally lie, but because it could give you poor advice and you would be unaware of that.
I'd like to just reiterate a couple of the questions I think we've touched upon for sure. And the big one for me is around some of the things that we should be afraid of, some of the worries that people have with AI. What are those big concerns that people have? And you mentioned data privacy there, but I'm sure there's a bunch of others.
We should talk about data privacy for a second, because I think people don't understand that when they hit return and their prompt goes off to a chatbot, that it leaves, right? It ends up in Microsoft's database or OpenAI's database or Google's database or Anthropic's database. And that data will be used at least to train the chatbot, maybe also for analytics purposes. It is possible that that data could be indexed. For instance, any conversation that you're having with Google Bard, you can share. It will create a link for you, and you can then share that link with another person so they can see the conversation that you had with Bard. Turns out the moment you hit that button, Google indexes the link, which means that conversation can be found by anyone with the right search terms. Oops. So you have to be very careful before you hit return that you're not giving away private, privileged, confidential, secure, classified information. We had an example here where in Australia's Department of Defense in August, employees were pasting stuff into ChatGPT because they didn't know better, because no one had told them that was a bad idea because that data could end up elsewhere. So think very carefully around the privacy issue around those things. Now, when you ask what I'm worried about, I'm actually much more worried not about the robots rising up and taking over, because frankly, they aren't up to it. It doesn't look like they're going to be up to it for a while because they're too busy confabulating and hallucinating. What I'm worried about is when people look at this as a solution to be able to radically cut the human parts of the business away and to just automate everything. So you've automated customer service, automated this and automated that, and there's no human oversight. And I think that's a profoundly bad idea, because these systems require a lot of human intervention and babysitting to work well. So that doesn't mean we aren't going to see an uplift in productivity as we figure out how to make these systems work for us. But to think that we are actually going to be put out of work by AI misstates what's really going on here and then the capability that they really offer. I do think that our roles will change. They will shift as a result of having a lot of AI. And the firms that don't get that just think, oh, I can fire my marketing department now, or I can fire the sales support staff or whatever. And there are a lot of people who think this right now. They're going to be very unpleasantly surprised. And to think that AI devalues human labor is to misunderstand what an AI does well versus what a human does, because they're different. So I think that's the real danger.
And if someone out there is worried about the future in terms of either their job or even in terms of what the world will look like, where do you think this is all going to take us? Because one of the big dangers that is often talked about is how governments are going to use this stuff, especially in warfare, and no longer will you need more soldiers. It's going to be a battle of technology. And that's the dark side. That's almost that Terminator scenario. Like, does that scare you at all? Or do you think that we don't need to worry about that?
Well, let's talk about jobs first. One thing I do advise people, and I advise them in the book, Because see how much of your job you can automate today using ChatGPT. All right. Give it a real go. Try to do it. Maybe don't tell your boss, but try to see how much of what you actually do day to day you can easily automate using ChatGPT, and the parts that are really hard to automate, which are generally going to be all the human bits, because chatbots aren't human and they're not going to get human. Yeah, maybe they can fake up a certain level of emotion, but they don't know how to read the room. Let's put it that way. Those are the bits that human beings are really, really good at. Relationality, empathy, all of these human qualities. And I think one of the things that will happen after you've done that list of things that you know that you could automate and the things you couldn't automate, you really want to now then start to focus on the things that are resisting automation. So give you an example that we're kind of all familiar with. 6-7 years ago, Elon Musk promised us we would all have self-driving cars by now. Cars would come and pick us up and take us off to wherever. Turns out it's really easy to teach a computer to drive a car and really hard to teach a computer to drive in the real world with other drivers and road conditions and weather and pets and pedestrians and road signage and all of that stuff. It's like that's the stuff that computers, artificial intelligence, is still really, really bad at. And so the more that your work touches the real world, whether that's because you're a tradesperson or because you're doing face-to-face, for instance, medicine or retail, right? That work has value precisely because it resists automation. This is part of the shift that we're going to go on. But if you've had your spell with ChatGPT and you realize it can do everything as good as you, maybe, then you really do want to have a deep think about what your future is in a role at work and how you can move to a role that emphasizes things computers don't do. I mean, this has always been the case. My mom spent her career as a secretary, which is kind of a class of office work that doesn't exist anymore because word processors and emails kind of got rid of it, except she was only called a secretary for the first half of her career, and then she spent the second half of her career as an executive assistant. Because really what she'd excelled at was getting things done for executives and making sure that their lives were extremely well ordered in the business. And so we move the goalposts on work all of the time. All right, I feel like that's the important thing where people are getting worried about whether I'm going to have a job.